What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. March is over, which means it's time to rank every movie I saw this month from worst to best. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your rankings of the movies you saw in March were. As always, this is just my list and not a definitive ranking. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these videos, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. So today we have 17 movies to talk about, a little less than I normally get around to, and some of these I have reviews written and recorded but not edited yet, so they're not on the channel. But I spent a lot of time wrapping up my 2021 videos before the Oscars, and I also just started a new job, so I had to balance out my schedule for that. So I am getting to some reviews a little late, as well as having just missed things that I wanted to see. Though now that things are stabilizing for me a bit, we should be back on track, and movies like After Yang, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and more, I should have those on next month's list. So if you see something I missed here, I apologize, but now that we've established all that, let's get into the list. In the last place is The Bunker Game, quite possibly one of the most disappointing Shudder movies I've seen in some time due to its wasted potential. While it has a great setup, that being a live-action role-playing game gone wrong, what should have been prime horror material winds up being one of the blandest, dullest experiences out there. The direction is completely flat, with a dark color palette that would make it impossible to know what's going on at times, making for a difficult to follow story. And the personalities of each of these characters was close to non-existent, with the cast having zero chemistry with one another, causing us to have a lack of interest in their arcs, whatever little there was. This should have been so much more, but it wound up being a slog to get through. At number 16 is Black Crab, the Netflix action thriller starring Noomi Rapace in a post-apocalyptic setting that offers a solid performance from Rapace, but honestly, not much else. While it's shot nicely and the action scenes are done well, rarely does it look to offer much substance beyond the fact that it's gritty and brooding. It barely expands on its dystopian universe, and despite Rapace providing something of an emotional core, rarely does this film lean into it. And even as an action movie, while it's competently put together, rarely does it feel fun, and in the end, it feels so dark that it just felt depressing and nothing more. At number 15 is The Desperate Hour, a misguided effort starring Naomi Watts that takes a romanticized effort at a real-world topic, that being the subject of school shootings, with Watts' character portrayed as being some potential hero racing to save the day. And not only does that not sit right with me at all, especially given the subject is an ongoing issue, the way the story even plays out, honestly, comes off as laughably bad. It's mostly a rinse and repeat structure, with most of the film just being Watts out on her own, huffing and puffing and repeating the same few lines over and over again on the phone. And it just comes off as hokey and kind of silly, as it's mostly void of tension. We get a little bit of a break from that formula towards the end, but it soon then wraps things up in a very abrupt third act, leaving this feeling like a hollow and pointless little thriller that is nothing short of disappointing. At number 14 is The Seed, a comedic creature feature from Shudder that doesn't consistently deliver on either the thrills or the laughs. While there's the occasional inspired moment of laughter, and there are some really cool practical effects, the film mostly feels like it was teasing something absolutely wild that ultimately never comes. It takes on a sitcom-like element in the first half that contains mostly scattershot jokes, and the alien creature at the core of the story doesn't get more involved in the proceedings until much later on. Yet even when that happens, the film still takes its time a bit in its build-up when it needed to go from 0 to 100 quickly. We eventually get that by the very end, but it becomes too little too late. This should have resulted in one of the year's biggest cult classics, but instead it winds up being a case of wasted potential. At number 13 is Cheaper by the Dozen, the fifth film in this odd little franchise, and its second reboot that sees Zach Braff and Gabrielle Union leading this new cast of characters where hijinks ensue. I just did a whole review series and ranking of these films, so I'll keep this short, but what I'll say is this: it's a mostly charming, wholesome film that manages to hold its own for much of the runtime, even if it's not perfect. However, it does begin to feel a bit too predictable and by the numbers towards the end, causing it to not totally stick the landing. Younger audiences will certainly enjoy it, but I don't know how much appeal it'll have beyond its target audience. At number 12 is Deep Water, the first film in 20 years by Adrian Lyne that I wish was something a bit more substantive. While I think this is a little more watchable than most have said, it's still inconsistent. Ben Affleck is by far the film's strongest element, with a Gone Girl-like performance that pulls us in so many different directions emotionally. However, no one else seems to be on his wavelength. The clunky dialogue and lack of chemistry among most of the cast, especially between its two leads, gives way to some unintentional humor that would take me out of the moment repeatedly, while the openly detestable personality of Ana de Armas' character becomes grating. I think there's some merit to it, but I was hoping for much more. Our only movie I'd describe as just okay, at number 11, is Master, the social drama meets supernatural horror movie starring Regina Hall that's been getting compared a lot to Get Out, though I don't think this worked quite as well, though it was a decent enough watch overall. While I really enjoyed all the performances and thought the tension among our three leads was done really well to make for a gripping story, its inclusion of supernatural elements are its weakest part. The problem is we don't visit these elements often enough, and the way the film tries tying them together to the main story, I think you could have removed them altogether, and outside of a few tweaks, you would have had the same effect here. I think writer-director Mariama Diallo shows a lot of promise, and I thought this was a decent enough debut, but there was potential for so much more here that I wish was explored. Bringing us into the good tier, at number 10 is Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom. The surprise nominee for Best International Feature actually follows a structure we've seen before. Someone who can be a little cocky, who gets placed in this fish out of water setting, in this case being a teacher in this small village, and he has to learn a little something about himself as he changes his ways as a result of the people around him, and it's been done to death I don't know how many times, and it can feel predictable. But there's still such a charm to it that, as predictable as it can feel, you just can't help but smile. It's a wonderfully acted film that's also beautifully shot, with the director going for as much of a natural feel as possible, which clearly shines through the way the scenery's captured, the exchanges, and its gentle approach. Plus, it does have some nice themes in there about what it means to be truly happy that do transcend its familiar story, so that it allows you to connect with it. It wasn't my favorite of the Best International Feature nominees, but I'm still glad I got to check it out. At number 9 is X. A24 slasher film from director Ty West has been receiving a lot of buzz as one of the year's best horror movies so far, though I gotta be honest, while I enjoyed the film, I just wasn't seeing exactly what everyone else saw. The film suffered from some pacing issues, not really kicking things into high gear until its second half. And even then, while we do get some cool moments, it really plays out like any other slasher film, not doing much new or out there in terms of story. Instead, these typical slasher moments are just given a lot of flair due to Ty West's distinct visual style, and that's where its biggest strengths lie. It's a film that I respect, and when you take the good with the bad, I still definitely enjoyed it, and I'm glad we got a mainstream original horror movie so that it keeps quiet the crowd that says we apparently don't get any original movies anymore, but I just wouldn't say I loved it, and if anything, I better describe it as adequate or pretty good. It's the style that ultimately makes it for me. At number 8 is The Lost City, the adventure comedy starring Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum that is a fun throwback film in the vein of Romancing the Stone. The film relies heavily on the chemistry between Bullock and Tatum, who are both very good here. However, while funny, every comedic moment would then be followed by this hokey cliche that ultimately made the film feel uneven. And despite being a star vehicle for Bullock and Tatum, many of its strongest parts actually come from the supporting cast, from Daniel Radcliffe to Divine Joy Randolph to Patty Harrison to Brad Pitt, and all of them I wish were utilized so much more than they were here, as there were frequent stretches of them totally disappearing, and those parts usually were not as funny. I think had the film avoided some of its more predictable beats and just went all in on the adventure element and trusted its supporting cast a lot more, it could have been great. Though, as it stands, it's uneven, but when it lands, it's a lot of fun. At number 7 is The Adam Project, the second collaboration between Sean Levy and Ryan Reynolds that sees them go for an 80s Amblin Entertainment vibe. And while this is already a style that's been done quite a number of times already, I'm always a sucker for whenever a film does this. It might borrow plenty of familiar elements, and it sees Reynolds doing his usual shtick, but it works here, especially thanks to his chemistry with Walker Scobell, who plays a younger version of his character. It's a fun, original little time travel movie, and if this is any indication of director Sean Levy's output moving forward, I am all for it. Bringing us into the great tier at number 6 is Hard Hit, which I'd best describe as speed meets phone booth. And while that premise may sound a bit gimmicky, director Sang-Joo Kim makes the most out of it, as this is a fast-paced thrill ride that does an effective job of consistently mounting its tension. It's a mix of battle of wits between our protagonist and the sinister caller who's asking for money, as well as some great car chase sequences as we wait on the edge of our seats, hoping that this bomb in this car doesn't go off. It's a pretty straightforward premise, though it surprisingly has a bit more emotion to it than you'd think for such an event-based film. There are times here and there it pushes the suspension of disbelief, and there's a reveal in the third act that didn't quite work for me, but it still ends on a strong note, making for a very enjoyable thriller that's probably going to slip right under the radar. At number 5 is Fresh, a twisted horror comedy that's a little difficult to discuss without spoiling, so I'll keep this one short. The film plays things at a mostly heightened tone, with some sharp interactions that cut the tension in a much needed way, given what's seen and what's implied can be pretty gruesome. It suffers from some slight pacing issues here and there, but you'll find yourself consistently engrossed in the story, given the direction several storylines go, along with 2 excellent lead performances from Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan. And all in all, it makes for another great entry in the horror comedy genre. At number 4 is Cyrano, the Oscar-nominated musical from Joe Wright that offers something a little different for the genre. Instead of big, bombastic, show-stopping numbers, characters weave in and out of the dialogue, still operating as if they were just standing there having a conversation, but just done in a way that doesn't make the exchanges feel too dry. And it's something people might find a little off-putting, but I really liked how it was done here. The songs go hand in hand together nicely, especially brought out by some tender direction from Wright and a slew of great performances, in particular from Peter Dinklage. It does have the occasional stumble, in particular in its third act, but all in all, it's another great entry in this mini musical comeback. At number 3 is The Outfit, a twisty throwback whodunit that takes place in one location that is a completely engrossing experience thanks to a strong screenplay and a slew of great performances. While I think it went on for maybe about a few minutes or so too long and it doesn't quite come into its own till about the half-hour mark, it still contains a really engaging mix of dialogue-based tension and action-based tension to keep you hooked in. And once things get going, it is fantastic. It's a really smart film with Mark Rylance especially giving a reliable performance, and it's unfortunate it didn't do as well in theaters as it should have, as it feels like the sort of film that comes to mind when people say they don't make them like they used to. At number 2 is Turning Red, the latest Pixar film that offers a bit of a break from the usual Pixar formula, instead offering a very hyper-stylized spin on some of the familiar Pixar elements, with a clear anime influence that involves extreme close-up and expressive displays of emotion. This is one of the funnier of Pixar's most recent outings that also serves as a giant metaphor for puberty, though one that won't be inappropriate for kids as it's still wrapped up in so many fantastical elements. While some have criticized this for not being as relatable as other Pixar films, I personally didn't see that, as it offers a great storyline about the troubles of growing up, filled with a lot of the usual Pixar heart and humor, maybe just told in a slightly different way. And all in all, it's another win for the animation giant. But in first place is The Batman, the first solo Batman film we've gotten in literally a decade, and it's the start of an exciting new era for the character. While at first I was disappointed to hear we weren't getting a new Batman movie that was set within the DCEU, once I actually saw the final product, I absolutely loved what they did with this. Matt Reeves once again proves himself as one of the best directors currently in the business, with this horror-inspired take on the character that also includes elements of film noir and David Fincher movies. It might be another dark and gritty take on the character, but it also does so for a specific reason, and where it takes things with him, the tone makes total sense and it never feels depressing for the sake of it. Despite being 3 hours, it's incredible how the film managed to balance out so many intriguing storylines and characters. characters, from the Riddler, the Penguin, Catwoman, and so on. And for the most part, it felt like we got just the right amount of time with each character. Plus, of course, Robert Pattinson makes for an excellent Batman, with a great balance of this traumatized recluse as Bruce, while also being the symbol of fear as Batman himself. Despite being such a dark film, it's one of the brightest spots of the year so far, and it's my #1 movie that I saw in March. But let me know, what were your favorite movies in March? Was it anything I listed here? Was it something I left off? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.